All right, American Contrarian, and we are here to talk with Daniel about white privilege, because he's heard my episode talking about my belief that it's a myth, and he disagrees. So
Slightly. First thing, I guess I am your first guest, right?
you are.
So does that make me the official Contrary fan?
You do? Well, I guess.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo. Better get a t-shirt. So, when we talk about white privilege being a myth, I want to just say as a first disclaimer, I'm not some leftist. I hate California, even though the weather's nice, and I go there to visit my mom. You know, I'm very much more of a conservative Republican type. More libertarian, but kind of decide with the Republican Party because they're kind of the ones that are at least trying to control my life the least.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about white privilege, I feel like it's like many other phrases that we use. Like, we use the word toxic masculinity, and I see all my conservative friends defending toxic masculinity. But by definition, toxic masculinity is something bad.
Sure.
So the problem that I see is that, you know, to me it's kind of the bull and the matador effect, where they wave this red flag in front of us and we go charging ahead.
Well, okay, but here's the thing. Toxic masculinity is in the same arena as white privilege, as far
Exactly.
as I see it. Like,
Yeah.
and like when you say people, no one's defending toxic masculinity. They're defending masculinity. It's just that
There are traits that are masculine that are now being attacked.
Yes.
So, but what I mean by the matador and the red cape is that we as bulls are charging towards this concept, and it's actually a ploy. It's a really great debate tactic where if you make your opponent defend something that is make him defend the straw man, then all of a sudden that straw man becomes him. And I think that's kind of part of the cycle that I see, and even with white privilege. So, as we kind of previously discussed before the show, you know, we're familiar with a couple of economic terms like the fixed pie myth, the rational consumer.
No one else is. So
Yeah, so the idea of the fixed pie myth is that, or fallacy, is that in economics, the idea that some people have is that money, for example, is this fixed pie, and if one person gets a bigger slice, by default, everybody gets a smaller slice.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the issue that I have with the concept of privilege. And so one reason why I didn't want my full name and everything used is because I'm going to share a little bit of family story as to what I think the problem with our understanding of privilege is.
Okay.
So our understanding of privilege, especially from the left's perspective, is that if you have a greater amount of privilege, by default, everybody has lesser privilege. So, and this is kind of...
I just want to say, like, the problem that I have with these terms of like toxic masculinity, white privilege, any of this is it's all bullshit designed to divide us. And when we validate it in any way, we are validating
the division.
The division.
And I think that's fair, but I also think it's important to recognize that these concepts didn't come out of nowhere. And that, I think, like, so for example, I think a perfect example is feminism. I think most people would agree with like first wave, second wave feminism. And, you know, third wave feminism started off, I think, kind of okay, but it went off the rails, and now we have all this insanity and stupidity. So it's like, so the problem is, and that goes back to that bull and the matador effect, where, you know, we start defending, you know, or we start attacking this crazy third wave feminism mindset, but what is being traditionally held are being viewed by the people in the middle is feminism in general. And so I think what ends up happening is that the reason why the left actually gets a lot more power is because they use us attacking third wave feminism as to see, oh, these guys are against, you know, first wave feminism, second wave feminism. They want to take away your rights. They want to make women sub.
I mean, that's
and that's where the real division comes in.
That's the thing, though. It's a smart kind of game that they play. It's a lie.
Exactly.
You know, but like even first wave feminism went a little too far pretty quickly. Yeah. Like, so all right. Keep going.
Yeah, we can circle back around to that if we want. But to go to the idea of white privilege, like, let me ask a question. Do you believe that you as a white male have any privilege because of that?
No.
Zero. Okay, cool. 100 years ago, do you think you would have any privilege because of that?
Yes.
And I would say also zero.
You'd say zero?
Yeah. And the reason for that is because you would not be privileged as a white male. Now, if you were a black male, you would be disadvantaged.
Yeah.
You'd have, I don't know what the opposite of disprivilege would be.
Yeah.
But that's one of the problems. And that, like, let me share this family thing that happened with, at least my own background, is that, not to get too long-winded, but I have an older sister and a younger sister. The younger sister was very doted upon by our uncles and aunts, and she was able to become like the typical upper middle class success story. Grew up poor, all the bad stuff, and then went off to college, has a house in Reno, which is now worth a lot, and she was able to do that. Now, because of the family dynamics and because of a weird past thing, that side of the family just did not like men.
Yeah.
So as me being a boy, I was not given those things.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, my sister being privileged in this way was not at my expense.
Yeah.
Now, had she not been privileged this way, maybe our lives would have been something similar, but it would not have been her being increased.
Yeah.
So I feel like this goes back to the fixed pie myth, where I feel like a lot of her concepts...
Her being increased is not what, caused you...
Yeah, I made mistakes along the way, and those mistakes, if I would have stayed in school, if I would have done all that jazz, I could have probably not had the rougher road that I did. And that's what I think is kind of the main point, is that I think when it comes to white privilege, a lot of people are viewing white privilege as this is at the expense of the other minorities.
Yeah.
Now, just like with toxic masculinity, the real problem is not that we don't talk about toxic masculinity, because we would agree that there are toxic male traits.
Yeah, but there's toxic feminine traits.
Exactly. So let me ask, do you think there is black privilege?
Yeah.
So...
But no, hold on. That's the thing. No, I don't think that any of this... If you want to play that game, sure, you could say that there's black privilege, there's white privilege, but I mean, if you wanted to play that game, you're just saying that, people should be divided based, like, it's okay, this system where currently, if you're Asian and you do really well, you got to do twice as well as anybody else to get into a college.
Yeah.
Because they just don't want... all of Harvard to be Asian.
And that to me is where you see an active disprivileging taking place,
disadvantage,
which we used to call racism.
Yes. That's my thing. I think that this is all, in fact, the toxic masculinity thing is a good example. It's just this is the okay version of racism and sexism. It's always been this way. Like, people get it in their heads that, like, back in the turn of the 20th century, that people just hated for no reason and they were just racist for no. There were scientific journals coming out backing up the opinions that people held then, okay? And that's the same thing now. There's scientific journals coming out talking about, look at how much more money white people make than black people. But if you're going to say that, okay, then if this whole civilization, this whole society was built to privilege white people, then how come Asians make more money?
Or Indians.
Or
from
Indians,
India.
Make more money on average. Like, how do you justify that?
Well, to your point even furthermore, like, what people also don't realize is that generational wealth basically disappears by the third or fourth generation.
Yeah.
So you look famously at the Vanderbilts, one of the richest men who ever lived in America. All of his, like, great grandkids now are basically broke or middle class. Now, there's all these trusts and things like that that have been put for universities.
No.
But if you actually look at the value, and there are some members of his family that were able to maybe build their own wealth along the way.
Hold up, here's the thing. Because this is actually an important topic. I think, like, the Rockefeller family is a very good interest. Like, I don't know about the Vanderbilts specifically, but I know that the Rockefellers keep all their money in trust specifically because you don't have to report it to the government that way.
Well, not only just that, there's also, it's kind of like...
You don't get the tax when you die.
Yeah.
You skip all that shit.
And I'm not saying that there's no generational wealth. I'm saying that the vast majority of generational wealth gets dispersed so much that it becomes... basically almost nothing. Now, that doesn't mean
that doesn't apply. That does not apply to people like the Vanderbilts. It does not apply to the Rockefellers. Those guys have...
I think with the Rockefellers, the one major difference that they had was not only you could argue the trust side, but you could also argue that a lot of the, like, it wasn't just John D. Rockefeller that was successful. Like, his grandchild was, his great grandchild was successful, and sometimes to a certain degree to their own. Now, I'm not saying that
The Vanderbilt.
All cases.
Oh my God! No, I do know about the Vanderbilts. You know who the Vanderbilts are today?
Who?
A fucking CNN anchor, that white-haired fuck.
The gay one, right?
Yeah. What's his name?
He's so whiny and annoying too.
Yeah, he's a Vanderbilt. Okay.
But nonetheless, like but his wealth that he has is much, and I'm not saying there isn't. Which is actually brings me to another interesting thing too, because there was a study done by Cornell University about, and since we're talking about racial topics, about why it is that the back of restaurants tend to be dominated by Hispanic and blacks, which tend to make far less money than the front of the restaurant, which tends to be dominated by whites and others. And so one of the things that they discovered was that they thought that this was some inherent racism that was going on. That like if a black guy comes in, or they even tried to attribute it to like incarceration rates, that like people, because minorities tend to be incarcerated more. Yeah. They work at a prison kitchen, therefore and then they go into the real world, and that's the only skills that they have. Yeah. But what they actually discovered was something actually a lot more funny, is that the main reason why most of those people worked those jobs, whether the front or the back, was because a friend referred them. Yeah. And most people tend to associate by their own racial lines. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have
that's the funny thing. That's what they're trying to do with all of this.
Well, they're trying to attribute every disparity
to race.
Not even just race, to some form of malice.
Yeah.
When there's a lot of other factors. And like the big one that Thomas Sowell brings up is the fact that PhDs that if you look at PhD recipients, like people who are doctors, blacks earn far less than the rest. And this has often been used as proof of even racism in higher education and in the upper class. Well, the reality is, like, as you know, most blacks that have their PhD in education, and education doesn't pay for garbage.
I actually did not know that.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
So like,
but also I would say this too.
But if you think about it, it also makes a lot more sense, because if you think about things within the black community, the PhDs that they tend to aspire, that the figures that they tend to be inspired by, tend to not be engineering, medicine. It tends to be a teacher, because that was a huge influence on their life.
Yeah, I think that another part of it too is that, like, when you accept people based on their race, and these people do not test as well, they are not as intelligent, honestly, then they're going to have a less successful career when they get out of college. Like, so when you what do you call it? What's the program? Diversity hire. When you're a diverse, like when you get the position over someone else simply because you're of a minority, people aren't going to assume you're as good, and you're probably not going to be.
Well, not only that, I think it's even worse, because it's, if you think about and I was thinking about this morning, was that, like, if you look at progressive liberals, one of the biggest complaints they have is tokenism. Yeah. We're like, this idea that this person only got hired because they're a token. And yet they're the ones that are creating these BS, cultural diversity officer or chairman, which is nothing but a freaking, it's minority hire on its face.
There's literally, there's a...
And it's all just a financial game. It's a way for a company to protect itself from a lawsuit.
Every CEO, every company now has on its board a fucking head of diversity and inclusion officer. Yeah. And it's nuts. That's fucking crazy.
I just honestly wish they'd be, honest about it. Be like, hey, dude, we're hiring you. We're going to pay you $100K. Don't bother showing up. You're just here we just have you here as lawsuit protection. Leave us alone.
No, I mean,
instead, this is the guy that chimes in during the marketing meeting and makes the crappiest Super Bowl commercials on the face of the earth.
I sent an email fucking a while back that, because this was like a year or two ago, there were signs all over the factory, there was like black at blank, fucking gay at blank, pride at blank, and Asian Pacific Islander, every single group, every group except white men. That
Yeah.
was the one thing, and it's so glaringly obvious when they have them all listed on a board. And I'm like, okay. So I guess the company is saying they are proud of every one of their employees just for existing, except me.
As if somebody who's, let's say, the descendant of Irish immigrants who came to this country shouldn't be proud of that heritage and history and suffered discrimination.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and I will say, like, yes, I will give it to people of African American descent that when it comes to their plight.
Well, actually, it really depends where you're talking about.
Sure.
The Irish went through some shit, and I mean, fuck, the Irish were enslaved by the English in Ireland and starved to death.
Yeah, well, you know where the word slave actually comes from, right?
Slavs.
Yeah, so those people had been enslaved so much that they became ubiquitous with the practice.
Yeah.
And so now with that, like,
and
to
that's
go back
why
to
the critical race theory people want to say that Slavs are technically people of color.
well, what's really funny to me is it's kind of the same thing with Jews. Like, it depends on if it's convenient for the argument or not.
Yeah.
That's when they get put in the minority category or the white category.
Yeah. And the truth
And the
is,
same with Asians too.
the black people, the Black Lives Matter group. I don't want to say black people. That's a horrible thing that I meant. But the Black Lives Matter, the black activist groups, they're black supremacist groups.
They are.
Really.
Yeah.
And they don't give a shit about the Asians or the Jews. They consider them both.
Well, I don't even think they really care about the blacks because if they did, they would not promote things that are dangerous to the black community.
You would
like
certainly
resisting
think.
police. I'm sorry, like every single major police case that I've seen, and for those that don't know, many years ago, and unfortunately many pounds ago, I was in the Marines. I've done tactical trainings. I've done detainee holds. Every single case that I've seen that has ever gone to the national level, except for one that I can think of off the top of my head, it always started off with, and I'm not saying the person deserved to die, or that the cop didn't maybe overstep their bounds.
Yeah.
I'm just simply saying it started with a person who is being put under arrest, resisting in some degree.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that cops don't ever screw up. Like that one chick just got arrested because she mistaken her gun for her taser, which is such a stupid move.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the guy was fleeing in a car, resisting arrest.
Yes.
And if you resist arrest, like I have been arrested so many times, never once in my mind, I'm like, once I got caught, I'm like, okay, the game's over, I lost.
Now see,
time to go to the jail.
I've resisted arrest as in running.
Yeah.
When I was underage, many times.
Yeah.
Okay, because before they have their hands on you, I mean, if you're not in a car, if you're not being pulled over, if you're on your feet and they're on their feet, I say it's fair game.
50-50. Yeah, I can get that. Yeah.
And
I'm not going to say it's fair game, but I will say, like, okay, I'm not saying we shoot fleeing people.
This guy that she shot, wasn't he in a car?
Yeah. And he was driving off, and there was officers trying to pull him out of the car.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm not denying it's a rookie mistake to be like, oh, my taser's over here, my actual gun is here, I'm grabbing this and I'm shooting the guy.
I mean, the thing is, she's been on the job for 25 years.
Yeah.
25 years.
I'm guessing she was probably more like a desk jockey, to be honest. But
I have no idea, but
yeah.
I'll say mistakes happen in the heat of the moment, and the fact that they're going to send her away for fucking 2 years is more like a year and a half, but still, it's ridiculous. And then after that, she's going to get out and be a social pariah.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I won't talk about the social pariah thing. But now, I do want to circle back to the white privilege thing, because I think there's also another important aspect for why I won't necessarily...
Wait, hold up. I had to jot in a story.
Okay.
I got arrested twice. Both were DUIs. Now, the first one I got out of, because technically I blew a .07 once he got me to the police station. But I was fucked up on some other things, and he knew, so he threw my ass in the cell anyways.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you spent in jail?
Oh no, these are the only 2 times other than Mexico for a night. Yeah.
You'll have to tell me about that one later.
Yeah, but so he threw me in there, and that was the first time. And this is before the whole George Floyd thing happened. And I gotta say, man, the cops treated everyone in there just like shit.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
To be expected, but like they were fucking mean, and they didn't need to be that aggressive and mean and shit all the time, honestly. And then when I came in when I got arrested after the George Floyd thing, and this time I flipped my car.
Ooh.
Okay, and I was just trying to get my girl out of the passenger seat. We're both fine, but and the cops came and they took me in. I blew like a .091, like .089, like I was barely over, but so they locked me up that time. They were so much nicer. Like the difference in the way they treated the inmates from one time to the next was considerable. Like it was.
You think that's a positive change?
Yeah, that I thought was a good thing. Like, there's no need for you to be such fucking assholes if the people are complying and doing what you tell them to do. And that's like, I understand having this kind of hard ass attitude, and it's got to get tiring and shit. But if you treat us with some respect, it's easier for us to treat you with some respect. And that is important. I think that like the beat cop that used to walk the neighborhood and knew the neighborhood, that doesn't exist anymore, and that's a problem.
Well, I think there's a couple fold of that. One, police are having to deal with staffing issues even long before everyone dealing with staffing issues. And the second part of it too is that, like, at least from my experience, I was in jail for 16 days, and there was this one particular deputy who every time I'd come back from visitation or doing anything, he would ask me, like, hey, where are you coming from? And I'd be like, oh, visitation. He'd be like, who'd you go see? I'd be like, oh, I saw some friends of mine. I'd be like, well, you could be seeing them all the time if you weren't in here. And it was just like, and if he said anything, the guy was just going to he was looking to try to throw you in the hole.
Yeah, well, I mean,
and it's like, but that's just a dick on professional move.
That's not bad, though, man. Yeah. That's really not bad.
I know, it's more mental, but it's still.
That's I mean, and you're in jail, right?
Yeah.
You're not in prison. So
yeah, true.
He's just trying to, like...
Which I'm still should be having the presumption of innocence.
I know, I've never been in prison, so I'm also just talking about jail. But, that's not that bad. Like, I just... fucking...
Well, I saw this one deputy that completely would constantly... And I'm talking about, like, drill instructor level wannabe...
Yeah.
berate this one particularly elderly gentleman.
Yeah.
Just because the guy was a little hard of hearing, but he wasn't like hard of hearing in the sense of screaming at him made sense.
Yeah.
Like you could literally write something down or just projecting your voice. Like all the other deputies were able to talk to this guy by projecting their voice, but this guy would like scream with globs of spit.
Yeah.
And literally I would overhear him go talk to the other deputies. Like, oh man, I love doing that. And it was just like his way of getting his dollars. There are bad cops out there.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, if you wanted to circle back to the white myth thing.
Oh, yeah.
So just like with the issue of toxic masculinity, we'll try to avoid that rabbit trail.
Yeah.
The problem is that we never talk about toxic feminism.
Yeah.
The thing is, I think that there are different privileges, but these privileges aren't in the sense of that fixed pie of slices, but more in kind of almost like in an evolutionary sense where we often one of the mistakes that a lot of people have is they hear the term survival of the fittest, and what they interpret that as is survival of the strongest or the best, when in reality it's survival of whatever is best within a context and its environment.
Yes.
So I think that there are, and so for me it's like...
Hold up. I know exactly what you mean, and I got to jump in. Because in this class that I took, Psychology of the African American, it was the first class I took in college. And in one of my most recent things, I read an email between me and the professor. But they talked about this, like, the bell curve, and how the bell curve theory is so entirely racist and horrible when it comes to IQ, because it shows that, like, on average, Asians are around 110. Ashkenazi Jews around 113, whites around 100, blacks around like 85 or 90 or something, and they're losing their shit over like, this is so racist, yada yada. And I'm okay. Hold on. When was the last time an Asian or a white person or anyone besides an African won the 500-meter dash?
Yeah.
Look at, sure, we get there that there's one Chinese guy in the NBA in the past 20 years, okay? But every year how many guys get drafted.
It's mostly blacks and whites.
Yeah.
Now, that is what I think is kind of an interesting thing, because there's, at least on the right, there's kind of the saying about like some cultures are better than others.
Yeah.
And I kind of do disagree with that to some degree.
I think that's 100% true.
And let me just put this caveat in. I think there are some cultures that are more evolved than others.
Mm-hmm.
So at a time, a more tribalistic culture was better
Suited for,
because of just, humanity hadn't gone that far.
Maybe.
And so, like, for me, I kind of the same thing. Like, the physical ability to run really fast at one point in our human development was a skill set that put you at the head of the pack.
And it still can be.
And it can be in very specific contexts.
Yes.
But on the flip side of that, we as a society have gone far less away from physical strength and ability to now, like, if you were really smart, but you were, a dirt farmer, it doesn't really matter how smart you were as a dirt farmer, you're still basically having the same output as another guy, and if you're not as strong as that other guy, you're falling behind. Sorry.
Everything
and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that, like, there's development that they have to understand that we as a species have advanced. Now, a couple of things, like, I will say that I think, ironically, I hate to even say this, but Pete Buttigieg said something that I think he was actually correct on, which was, he said that within the black community, they do not see a dividend on education.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a problem. I don't think this is I don't think this is something that whites have imposed upon black society. I do believe that this is, just like with all groups, an internal thing that they've put on, which ironically exists in every race, but in different degrees, of a self-imposed view. Whereas, like, for example, I asked people, can you name me a black CEO?
Hold on, I disagree with that idea, kind of, because, like, what do you mean that black culture in general does not see a dividend from education, maybe, but black culture, like, as a whole, I gotta say, African American culture, is completely fucked up.
Well, that's the thing, that this is a very interesting thing. So I'm not sure.
75% of kids come from homes without the father.
So here's what I think is funny about when I say the word black culture. What most people instantly think of is they think of ghetto urban youth, right?
Yeah, that's what he's talking about when he says that.
True, but if you think about it, like, what black culture kind of used to mean, in some degree, was like the Huxtables and the Bel Air.
Yes.
Like, that was like and it was the same thing that
before they started funding broken homes specifically. Okay, there was a functional community.
Oh yeah,
like, this is
blacks used to have higher marital rates than whites.
Yeah, I know. This is what's crazy, is when you incentivize things, people do those things. It's not fucking rocket scientists. Everybody talks about how, the world was so horrible in, the early 20th century because there was so much racism. You know how much more likely you today as a black person would have been to own a home in 1920, 1930?
A lot higher.
As a black person, way more black people, way more white people, way more people owned homes. Percentage of the population that owned their home, much higher.
Well, it's even sadder, I think, because most people don't understand the actual history of Jim Crow.
Yeah.
So they draw a direct connection from the slavery or the Civil War directly into Jim Crow, and that actually didn't happen.
Yeah.
There was an actual inner part in there where blacks were senators, congressmen. They had equal rights, and it should actually be a warning to all Americans of how, within a very short window, a very politically motivated militant group, sounds familiar, was able to suppress an entire race of people within a region that was the power brokers at the time. Like, if you were a part of the Confederate military, you were forbidden from having certain positions and offices. Yep. And the only people that were left in these areas were the former black slaves.
But, I mean,
who rose from their oppression and then got put back and were oppressed again.
Yes, but there's also people. A lot of people don't know much of the history. Like, I feel like.
Well, I think ironically, the first thing that they went after was gun rights.
The history around Reconstruction is, I think, one of the most muddied, intentionally misrepresented things ever. Like, and even in like that psychology African American class that I took, they weren't, when they talked about it, they had to address how insanely corrupt a lot of those politicians that got in were. Those black politicians, they were...
Well, and to be like, not to defend the indefensible.
No, but I understand.
I can understand, yeah.
Yeah,
I'd be
I get it.
Too, yeah.
I get it. But then, and this is kind
But that also shows the dangers of reparations.
Yeah, yes.
Like, this is the danger of getting payback.
Yes.
If World War I, the Civil War, all these things
Yes.
you teach us is that you can never pay back. And you will only backfire.
Yes, and that's, okay, so I think we're living through that right now. Okay.
Well, it's kind of like, there's a saying in the military about like every general is trying to fight the last war. And that's, I feel like the same thing with political activism.
Yes.
Like, everyone's trying to fight the last war. And it's like, I'm sorry, the cops that were beating up, the civil rights demonstrators back in the 60s, they're all either dead or retired. Yeah. They're gone.
No, I mean, now most of the cops in most major cities aren't even fucking white.
Well, what's really fascinating is if you watch there's actually an episode of Dragnet where they're actually going to and recruiting black students to try to become cops. And this is a TV show that was happening in like 1967.
Yeah. No. Black people have been cops since the 19th century.
Yeah.
Like that's the other thing that just, the history of everything is so entirely misrepresented. And the first time I got a taste of all this shit was in that class that I keep coming back to. It's crazy that when I took that class, I thought, oh, this bullshit's never going to come up. I have thought about that class more than any other fucking
Well, that was actually, that opinion was shared by a lot of people. Like, a lot of people thought, okay, this is the stupid crap that people are going to get taught in college.
Yeah.
And these are people who've never experienced the real world.
Yeah.
And it's not going to affect any of us. And now it's affecting all of us.
Yeah.
Now, to go back to what I meant by the idea of it being, or to white privilege being a myth, because I know I do like these little rabbit trails, but I am trying to set up my point. So, for me, it's kind of like, one question I like to ask people is, can you name me a black CEO who is not involved in the entertainment or fashion industry? Now, I can think of it because I looked into it after I felt my white shame and guilt rising up.
Off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, no, but we can think of white guys like Steve Jobs and the others.
Dead.
Yeah, he's dead. Bill.
But yeah, sure. Actually, I can think of an African American CEO.
Who?
Elon Musk.
Yeah, you're right. That's great. But I was going to say, like, the reason why I mentioned that is that, to go back to Pete Buttigieg's point, like, the problem is that the heroes that are being put in the black community are projecting a lifestyle that statistically overwhelmingly is going to be horribly damaging to a person.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I get that people do the thug life culture, and then sometimes they get out and they become successful. But to me, it's the exact same thing that happened with the Italians and the mob. No, when the Italians started distancing themselves from the mob, not only did they become integrated with quote unquote white society, which is just a key term. Just a catchphrase for mainstream society and polite society.
I said that in this class back in 2010.
And let me guess, you got deemed a racist.
I said, like, honestly, like, I feel like everyone becomes white eventually. Like, Italians used to not be white. Now they're white. Mexicans are almost white, is what I was saying.
Depending on what generation they are.
And I was like, and she said, yes, but why is white the default thing? And I was like,
because you made it the default.
And I said, honestly, I don't care. I don't care if it's white. You can call us green. Call it whatever the fuck you want. Well, doesn't matter.
So not to go to like, too thick my family history. So like one thing that I think is funny is the concept of selling out.
Yeah.
So if you're black and you try to go into white society, they call you a snowflake. If you're Native American, they'll call you an apple. These are all just derogatory terms that people within that group use to project onto those groups.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that's funny. I am white. My white trash family, who are considered the white trash of Winnemucca, which for those who don't know, Winnemucca is the most eastern Nevada place you could find, consider that a sellout move.
Consider what is it?
Trying to be like white collar successful.
Okay, yeah.
And so that's the thing that's funny is like every single racial group does this to their racial group.
Yeah.
It's not even white.
No.
And the fact that we even contribute these things as being quote unquote white.
Yes.
And like I'm pretty sure you saw what happened with the African Heritage Museum.
No, what happened?
So, Obama was there, he did the opening ceremony, and they had all these displays. One of the things that they put on this like African Heritage Museum was that being prompt is a white trait.
Yes.
And it's like,
no, I heard about that.
So that's not being a white thing.
No. But hold on, why are they doing this shit? Why are they doing it? Because they want to sell a lot of very bad, very destructive, and very materialistic ideals to people who don't have a strong family structure that can teach them values to respect and hold of their own.
And I also think that, there are to me, the charlatan aspect that you're talking about, I think is huge. And I think a lot of it also is...
The what?
The charlatans, the scam artists.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are doing that because that's the unfortunate, sad way that they think that most people who became successful.
Yeah.
So, my family, I forgot, I had, an uncle who was nobody who ever made more than $100,000 did it honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm that's actually not the case. There's a lot of people,
Yeah.
But that's unfortunately the mentality that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
And because you talk about your class, the thing that I always found that was crazy was that I'd just come back from Iraq, and I was still pretty gung-ho, in Marine mode at the time. And I go to my sociology class, and all of a sudden we're reading Marx, and I'm this was the guy that we were all against. Why are we reading about him?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't study, but it was just
a
weird cultural clash at that moment where I'm oh, this is that commie bastard.
Yeah. Now, see, I grew up, I graduated high school in 2010, and, the economy completely fucking tanked in 2008. My mom was selling those bad mortgages, the adjustable rate. Subprime and adjustable rate mortgages. And my stepdad was doing construction. So they both lost their fucking jobs, and we were broke as shit. And I remember I toured a house in Beverly Hills around that time, and I was just stunned. $10,000 koi fish in a fucking pond, yeah.
Wow.
And I'm man, they got fish in here, and we don't have fish in our fridge.
Yeah.
We
don't have fish sticks.
Yeah, what the fuck? And I decided I was gonna just go all commie now, and I read the Communist Manifesto. Not an easy read at the time.
Yeah.
Still not an easy read because it's intentionally confusing. And I got into.
Well, I think a lot of it is designed to be we want to try to find people who are angry.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know why they're angry. They do recognize there's something wrong, but they can't really put their finger on it.
Yeah.
So we're going to give them these vague terms like class. I've never had anybody.
Class is real.
Class is real, but what's funny to me is nobody's ever been able to explain to me what the actual middle class is. Because poor people who like to not think of themselves like poor will call themselves middle class. And then rich people who don't want to call themselves rich because they are kind of embarrassed by it will call themselves middle class.
Yeah, I can define what middle class is pretty easily. You own a modest home that fits your family, and you don't own another home or two or three, unless that's how you're paying your rent, maybe.
But that's my point. There's not these there's this kind of weird, at least economically, there's not a very specific.
I don't think so. It's pretty easy to tell who's in your class when you're out with them.
Because technically, I would say technically speaking, I would consider myself part of the middle class because I make the medium income for the area in which I live in.
I don't think you. I don't know. I don't know your income.
Yeah.
But I would say it's you when you go out with your friends, if you're in the same class very quickly. You go to a club and you can't afford it. You go to a restaurant and you can't afford it. You go or you want to go somewhere and they're that place, that's a shithole.
But think about this on the other hand, because you were talking about the home ownership.
Yeah.
So the home ownership that you put as a, which I get why that is. It's a whole history of marketing and things like that. But if you look at owning a home as part of being the middle class, the problem I have with that statement is that people who own homes also, are people hey, I can't really afford to go to the club.
Yeah.
So now does that automatically
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
If you don't going to the club is a recreational activity. That people in the fucking ghetto go to the club all the time.
True. Is Warren Buffett part of the middle class because he has a beat up car and owns a modest home?
No, not at all. But,
sorry, that was a joke.
Yeah, no, and I get what you mean. And you can't just tell from just going out with someone. Okay, that's not a rule, but it is the people you work with are going to be in the same class as you. It's pretty understandable.
Unless they're married.
If you're making if you're making 7 figures, then you're upper class.
Depending on the area.
Yeah, depending on the area, you're either upper middle or upper class.
I mean, the thing is, this is where I think like it's becomes really subjective.
$1 million's actually not even that much money.
It really is, yeah. It's not.
I know.
Well, the thing is, and the other factor as far as home ownership, like the big factor for why, like I take a little exception to it, is due to the fact that one of the big factors is that our generation of millennials are not getting married at the same rates as previous generations, which is going to affect household income and what that middle class is too.
Yeah, but also fucking.
I mean, we're a bunch of losers that haven't gotten married.
The cost of houses in our generation is so much higher than it was.
And there's other factors for that. Now, Reno.
I gotta piss real quick.
Okay.
I'm gonna pause this or
pause. Yeah, we can pause and we can keep it.
All right.
Now, so basically, like I guess in summary, because I'm probably sure you're probably wanting to bring this around, is that for me, it's not that white privilege is a myth as in non-existent. I just believe that there are other privileges that work in different ways. And so like Damon John...
But this is my first point pretty much again. Why make it racial? Why draw these dividing lines?
So like, okay, do you think, so I'm not sure how much you watch like TV or whatever, but Damon John, who started FUBU, he's the black guy on Shark Tank. Would that guy be as successful as he is if he was white? And my answer is that actually I believe he would be, but not in the way he was.
I mean,
I think he would have made his own way.
Like this is the thing. Like these questions are all irrelevant because it takes all the context out of every situation.
Well, and that's what I think is actually
white
important.
Privilege does. It's just, and that's what like saying, oh, all Mexicans are lazy. It's all whites are privileged. No, man. Like, what's the context? What's the situation? Even when you say like, oh yeah, every time the police have an interaction, you're really going to tell me every single interaction where it's a black person, they're just more on guard? Bullshit. Fucking, there's some scary ass white people out there.
True. And for me, what I'm simply saying is that like I do feel that as far as like a privilege or things like that are concerned, that I do think the context is important.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's better, having a truck or having a Lamborghini, or what vehicle's better, a truck or a Lamborghini? Well, it depends. If I want to show off that I'm rich, the Lamborghini. If I want to do a trash hauling business, the truck. Yeah. And so I think that what I agree with you that the big problem with like the critical race theory is doing is that it's trying to put people into these categories of oppressed and oppressor versus basically saying like, hey, how do you leverage who you are as a person and flip the script and that story to make a life or an outcome that you want?
Well, see, but that has nothing to do with race.
So, but I think it does
need to have anything to do with race.
The reason why I think it does have a little bit to do with race is because, like what we did was when we mentioned the Irish immigrants. That is their part of their story. That, hey, we were an oppressed people. They worked. They got chewed up in the battlefields of the Civil War, died in the coal mines.
That's not your story.
But if you're Irish, it is.
No, but it's not.
Your family heritage is not.
You didn't do it. You don't know anything about dying on a battlefield. You don't know shit about what it was like to be enslaved by the English. You don't know none of it.
But I'm saying, so do you believe that a person's family history is part of their story? And part
of yes. But I don't think that we need to keep this racial oppression alive in our generation. That's all that this idea of white privilege or black oppressed does. That's all it is. And
I agree with you that with the current movement that that's happening, that it is. But I don't think that. I think like the problem that I have is that by saying something like, "Oh, this doesn't exist," it's really hard. No, but that's a very hard message to sell.
No, man. It doesn't. Like, it's crazy too because at the time when I took that class, the first time I ever heard white privilege together, I was one of 3 white kids in the class. Everyone else is black. Nobody believed in it.
Well, it's funny. It is funny that most white liberals are the ones that are promoting.
No, I mean, back then this was a fringe idea. It hadn't gotten out to the mainstream.
Well, why do you think it went from the fringe to the mainstream?
Because in 2013, this woke thing really took off.
But that's my point. Like, the idea of the privilege has enough appeal to get motivation and backers to go into a very fast and, determined direction.
Yeah.
And I don't think the way to counterbalance that is be like, oh, hey, this is all wrong, you're stupid. I'm not saying that's your case.
No.
But I'm saying, like, to sit there and to talk about, like, okay.
No, but when you validate this idea of...
I don't think it's validating.
It 100% is. Because when you say that, okay, well, there is white privilege in these aspects or whatever, you're again, taking out the context and just saying that in all circumstances, race means the same thing.
Actually, I would say I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying that the context is exactly what I'm trying to emphasize. That depending on the context, there's a case of being white may be a disadvantage, and when I say disadvantage, I'm not saying absolute all ending. There may be drag or slow you down.
No, there's a ton of disadvantages to If you these are all.
But I say these are all the struggles that every person within a particular race is having to struggle through.
These are the vast majority are all manufactured by the very people talking about white privilege. They create these exact problems. Like when they're the ones who have supported fucking putting students into colleges based on their race. What do you call it?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Okay.
Which I think affirmative action made sense at a particular time. Like initial right after, it kind of made a little sense, but it should have been decided.
Okay, maybe maybe in the 70s.
Not even. I would say like in the 60s it kind of made sense. 70s it should have been dying, and then the 80s it should have been dead.
Yeah, but it's still going on now.
Yeah,
and that's insane.
I agree.
And
it actually hurts the black community.
Yes, it hurts the communities it's supposed to help more than anything. And people are like, oh, well, I don't give a shit if Harvard's all Asian. I don't care if every class is 90% Asian. I do not care. It does not bother me at all. Fucking people should be at the university that teaches about the things that they're interested in with people who they can work with, not tokens in classrooms for diversity.
And then also being put into colleges that are not a good fit for them.
Yes, where they don't meet
schooled.
Yeah, and then you don't end up making the connections that you would.
Which is kind of actually, and I know I sound like I'm flip-flopping, but this is actually what I think is one factor for why that movement's taken off, is because you have countless black or young black people who are smart enough to get into college, but went into a college that was out of their league because they had an inflated score, and then they couldn't perform, and all the while they're being taught the reason why blacks are falling behind is because of
white
institutional racism and things like this. And so why should they not attribute this failure to what they were taught is the reason why they're falling behind?
Exactly. But who created the entire system that makes them feel this way in the first place?
Well, it's unintended consequences gone awry.
I don't think it's unintended at all. I think this shit is absolutely intentional. I think that this is you know what critical theory is in general, right? It's just that's what this is all a part of. It's all a part of critical theory.
I'm a little less conspiratorial. I think a lot of times things just...
No, man. There's no way.
I definitely think there are opportunists who come along and are... Like, I mean, Al Sharpton to me is one of the worst human beings alive.
And he's come out and said that this shit's gone too far.
That's bad.
Yeah.
And,
like, when Al Sharpton is coming out and saying that it's too much... I mean, have you seen, dude, there's videos of kindergarten students having to apologize to other kindergarten students because they're white and they're black.
Within my, at least, religious community, the one that pissed me off the most was a white man kneeling down to a famous, like a black rapper and like apologizing. And I'm just like, you guys didn't, like, I have not owned a slave.
Yeah. I don't know anybody who's ever owned a slave.
Yeah.
Like, the fuck is this, bro?
Yeah. And a lot of it is just virtue signaling.
Yes. And that's so, and then this is where it leads. Like, when I was in high school, honestly, race.
What type of high school did you go to?
I went to Reed High School.
I went to Hug.
Yeah.
So, this is where my understanding of like racial dynamics are a little different.
Okay.
Like, in fact, because like this was one of the conversations I had with my stepfather who grew up as a black boy in rural Mississippi during Jim Crow. Because we were talking about issues of racism, and he's like, and And I was like, I was like, well, I've experienced racism. And he's like, how?
Yeah.
And he was very skeptical. Now, by no means am I saying that my plight or story compares to what he had to go through.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's non-existent.
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember as a elementary kid, I had a black friend named Anthony. Him and I were like friends. We hung out every day. And then another black kid came along and said, hey, don't hang out with this white boy. And I lost the only friend that I had in elementary school, which as a little kid is devastating.
Yeah.
But and I was like, and that was purely because of my race.
Yeah.
So it's not like I said.
Another thing that I've got a lot of friends. I was already over 20, so I didn't have to deal with this, but I got a lot of friends who were like the only white kid in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
Same.
they got the shit kicked out of them on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen the other way around. If it did, it would be a fucking national news story. Okay, like, oh yeah, a black kid is getting chased and beaten every day by all the white kids. That'd be on the fucking news in a week. Like, they don't give a shit when it's the other way around.
I think that's kind of why, for me, a lot of what I see is just reactionary. It's because in the past there was a time where that would happen. Yeah. And it would be ignored in the same way it would be ignored now.
Yes.
Now everybody's pendulum swinging.
So that's what I was saying at the beginning, though, is with toxic masculinity, that's just sexism. The reverse form is now okay. Yeah. Now it's okay to be sexist against men. This white privilege is just, it's now okay to be racist against white people.
Remember, gender doesn't exist.
Yeah. Unless at the same time that sexism is now okay against men, gender also doesn't exist.
Unless a person who's not born of that gender wants to be that gender, then it's absolute. Yeah.
It's none of it makes any sense.
I just honestly feel like a lot of it is just that there's no more like dragons to slay, and now it's like we're just trying to find like there are people that are like
our society is collapsing. I think
it kind of is. Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the dollar to collapse. I think that the reason they're ginning up all of this racial, and they're trying to make it worse daily, but the reason they're ginning up all this racial hatred and division and cultural division between liberals and conservatives and yada yada, because the bankers do not want to be held accountable when this house of cards crumbles, and they want to be able to have a scapegoat. They want to be able to say, it's because of the race war, the civil war. That's why the fucking everything fell apart. When in reality, it's going to be because the dollar collapses. And they want
to... theory.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I used to be pretty like hardcore into conspiracy theories. I kind of recognized as I studied economics and movements more that things are a lot more organic, and that's what actually makes it scarier. COVID had to ruin my perfect analogy, like so many other things. But like I used to think like there's a world of difference between like a actual pandemic is way more dangerous than something like AIDS being used by heroin addicts. Like, like an actual pandemic like the Spanish flu is far more deadlier because it's organic and uncontrolled than like something that's within a limited variable of a common group of people. And that to me, like that's something for another
it's
discussion.
A completely different topic.
Yeah. But for me, it's like, I think that the, like I said, you believe that it doesn't exist. I believe.
Okay. Again, I think that you should not think of it the way that you're thinking of it now, of like, okay, that there are these privileges that each group has, because the way that you're changing the definition, the way they look at it.
Well, I would say I'm doing the difference. I believe I'm trying to keep to the actual definition of words, which is where a lot of this mess has come from. Well, so like, for example, toxic masculinity. The word toxic has a definition. Now, there's a connotation to both of those words put together, but that connotation is what's bad. Like, we should go with what is... Like, I do believe there are toxic male traits. We should not support toxic masculinity, but we should defend organic.
All right. This is the definition of white privilege. Inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So when you say that white privilege is not a myth, you are saying we live in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice.
Well, you should know that the dictionary is being changed to fit political race theories.
Yeah.
But for me, like if you look at what the word white and what the word privilege mean separately, this is an entirely different definition.
How is it? How is it? Because what is a privilege?
So like I said, the privilege, as I shared with my family growing up analogy, my sister was privileged, but that wasn't necessarily at my disadvantage.
So, but that still doesn't.
So like, okay, here's a perfect example of.
Still,
here's what you could say is a perfect example of white privilege. Now, granted, I think it's a good thing. I don't have any issues with it. But interracial marriage is on the rise. But traditionally, people tend to marry people of their same race. Now, statistically speaking, people that are white, because anytime you have any group that you add up together, you're going to have a hierarchy of the top and the bottom, right? So, economically speaking, by virtue of me being white, I am more likely to attract a white partner who is going to be economically on this end here. That's an advantage.
I don't agree with any of what you're saying.
Why?
Because I wasn't listening that closely.
Okay.
And I've had, I mean, just most of my girlfriends aren't white.
You're the exception.
No,
I'm saying.
no.
I'm not,
I don't feel like that's even, no.
I'm not denying the fact that interracial marriage is on the rise, and I think it's a beautiful.
But still, even if, so what?
So if you have two people that are of a higher economic.
But why you're making the assumption that if I date a white girl, she's going to be in a higher economic.
I'm not saying you specifically. I'm saying large general statistical trends.
That's not at all okay. Still not fair. You're taking context out of every situation.
I'm not taking context.
Yes, you are. I'm a working class people. Most of the people I interact with are working class people. Most women I interact with are working. So in all likelihood, no matter what race the girl is, she'll be working class.
Okay, so let's say, for example, you're working class and you have let's say a black coworker, you guys go to a bar.
Yeah.
And you're both working class.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, if there is which statistically is a higher likelihood of happening, a upper income earning white woman at that bar, she's more likely to find you attractive, which could potentially.
That's not true anymore either.
It is though.
No, it's not.
The marriage rates are still consistently a long way.
Marriage rates are going tanking, but
I'm not talking about the overall. I'm not talking.
Stop.
I'm not talking about.
Look at the birth rates for white children, and look at the birth rates for mixed race children.
I'm not denying that there's a rise. I am saying that if you still look at a case by case comparison, even though, okay, to put the analogy this way, the plane is going down, but the person you're sitting next to is probably going to be somebody that looks like you. More, even though the overall trend is going down.
I still don't really get your point, and I disagree. I just don't like
because it does add into household income.
Okay, but you're making a lot of assumptions. I just don't.
I'm not making assumptions. This is just like I'm just simply saying, like statistically speaking, it is more likely that if a person is to get married, they are more likely to marry somebody that is of their same race.
All right. Well, sure, but people are getting married less in general.
True, which is different factors.
When people are having kids, they are not white, mostly.
You're saying that the majority of kids that are being born now are mixed raced.
I'm saying that. Yeah, I'm curious to actually see what that would be.
I would say the trend is going upward for mixed race, but I would still say the dominant is race to race.
I mean, I really doubt it. I really do doubt it. But also, okay, so privilege, the definition of privilege, a special advantage, immunity, permission, right, or benefit granted to be enjoyed by an individual, class, or caste. That's what privilege is defined as. So, a special...
So, to go back to my restaurant analogy, you're more likely to socialize with somebody of your same race, which we agreed on earlier.
Can we not go back to that? Can we just end going back to that?
Okay.
It's a bad example in my opinion.
I think it's a great example.
I just don't think it is. I don't think it is.
Because most people, when it comes to the jobs they work, it's kind of like the myth of the rational consumer.
You're talking about that. I thought you were talking about the dating things.
No. I'm talking about, to go to that Cornell study about the restaurants.
Yeah.
About the back of the restaurant makes a third less than the front of the restaurant, I believe.
Okay,
and they were trying to figure out why this racial disparity was existing, and what they discovered, it was just basically due to the fact that most people are going to have friends in relationships. So
again, do you believe if white privilege, if this is how you define privilege, then you're saying that you believe that white people have a special advantage, immunity, permission, right, or benefit granted to or enjoyed by an individual.
I would disagree with the word granted, because that makes it out to be that there's some like grand master wizard who's like.
That's exactly how they say it.
And I agree. I would say that's the wrong
So
part.
I'm just saying, I really think that you should not. You are validating their whole shtick when you say, okay, yeah, white privilege is real, but it's not exactly what you think it is.
I also don't think it's all consuming as they make it out to be.
Yes.
Like, everybody has advantages, everybody has disadvantages.
So I'm saying, do not put a color on it. It's racist. It's racist to be. Why are we putting colors in front of adjectives?
I feel like, but what I will say to some degree is that like,
I've heard white tears. Like I don't want to hear about your white tears.
Yeah.
You know, we're not here to talk about.
Which is funny to me because like the highest groups who commit suicide, at least in the United States, is white males.
Yeah.
Globally, it's different, but
Yeah.
so it's like, but so like yes, I get what you're saying that there's a danger in validating. I just think that there's also a danger. This is maybe where we could agree to disagree on. Is I also think there's a danger of saying of taking people who have a wrong felt experience and then saying this is entirely false and not true.
I disagree.
When saying to somebody, this is what you perceive.
Yes.
Everything you perceive is not entirely wrong. It's just misunderstood because of the thing that I was actually advocating for, which was a greater understanding of context.
Yes. Okay. So I see what you're saying there, and basically you're saying you want to go about it in a softer context.
More of a taekwondo approach versus just being a brick wall.
The issue that I have, and this is what they want too. This is why they do this. Why they set it up this way. If you're a self-respecting white person, you should not play into this crap of saying like, oh yes, I'm privileged over you in every aspect in American life. Because that's what white privilege means.
Well, that's what they're trying to get you to. And I'm not, for me, I would say that there's, like I said, advantages and disadvantages based upon circumstances and context.
But you're still dividing everyone up into their racial groups, and you're saying that these are immutable and unchangeable facts in our society.
So to go to like the idea of facts and labels and things like that, here's why, at least in my own personal life, I do feel it's important. I looked at the statistics of what I was born into at a very young age. And I got very depressed because I was like, holy crap, this isn't good.
I don't know what you mean.
Because my mom had been institutionalized, addicts, the whole bunch of whole stuff.
No, I got all that too.
Yeah. So I took a look at that and I was like, okay, I don't want to repeat this. So a lot of times when we talk about statistics, we act as statistics do exist and they tend to be correct for a reason, but where you as an individual get to choose is what line of that statistics you fall on. And that to me is so it is true, statistically speaking, in some communities, if you're black, you're more likely to go to prison than you are to graduate high school.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with you, that's not because of some, white privilege thing or thing like that. Like, this is where we agree.
Yeah.
But for me, at least, if we're going to have a message that resonates with those that are in those communities that are facing those statistics, we have to tell them basically, these are the statistics. These are the realities. These are, privilege, disprivilege, whatever you want to call it.
But that's the thing. You can't call it that. You cannot.
What side of the statistical line do you want to be on as an individual?
You can't call it white privilege, though.
I'm not calling it white privilege. I was just saying in that context. Okay.
You can't say that because when you say white privilege, that is validating the idea that, the reason you guys are getting shot in the street, the reason you guys go to prison, it's all because of us.
Yeah.
Fuck that, man. It's
statistically just false.
It's not true, at all. It's just not. So, we can't. That's why.
I think what was the statistic? It take like 223 years of police on black shootings to match 1 year of blacks on blacks.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think
it was 23 years.
It's getting now to the point, like, I said this in that email, like, to that professor. Does it only matter? You're advocating for all this defund. This I want to say. Defund the police. what is it really about? Why do they want to do it? Because they want to nationalize the police force.
Which we have called the FBI.
Yes, but no, they want it on. That's all. No more police.
I will say I do agree with I do think there should be a national law enforcement license.
What do you? I don't at all. No.
Here's why. Because you do have cases where cops did something bad, didn't go to prison but got fired, and then they go become a cop in the next county.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that can be done against them.
Okay, I see what you mean there. But I still don't. I just don't like the idea of the federal government being in charge of anything, really.
Well, I think the role of the federal government should be to ensure that. So, like, one part of it I do think is to ensure that states are not violating the rights of its citizens. And when you consider the amount of power we do give to a law enforcement individual, that is a huge amount of power that I think, granted, or internal affairs does a great job. I'm not saying they don't, but I do think that there needs to be there's nothing that internal affairs can do if I, as a bad cop, go to the next county because I got fired and become a cop. Yeah,
but here's the issue that I have. Canada, I believe, has a nationalized police force.
Oh, interesting.
I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that. But nationalized police force means instead of it being a locally run, somebody who lives in the fucking area, who's involved with the community, all the police. No, instead, you have shock troops that are commanded from Washington, D.C. on the other side of a continent, okay? And they're going to be telling everybody what to do from there here. And I don't fucking want that.
I think what's even along those lines that is even, I think, more frightening is the fact that, like, okay, I support FBI, things like that.
I fucking hate the FBI and the CIA. They're the most corrupt institutions.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss that another time.
Yeah, right.
But I was gonna say, for me, there is a need for it, because of technology and things like that. However, the problem I also have is that we create layers and layers that prevent bad laws from being ended.
Yes.
So it's like, our state legalized marijuana, and we're still dealing with banking law issues over it, where we have legal dispensaries that are having problems with, these are legal tax-paying businesses that are having problems financially doing basic transactions because of a federal law. Now, if we had just a state law that said, hey, marijuana is bad, don't smoke it, and then we as a state said, okay, we don't want to have this law anymore, problem's done, over with. And that does go to, I'll steal your tinfoil hat for a second. That does go to the unfortunate overall problem with the war on drugs, with the fact that it is a financial boondoggle for law enforcement. And that's the unfortunate thing about it. Luckily, some states realize, hey, we can make more money taxing it than we can just arresting people for selling it. But
it's and then you look at how badly they botched that in California.
Well, I actually think what's funny about it too, and I'm not because like I said, I am
somehow they got the cartel to come back.
Not only that, it's also it reminds me of the old taxi medallion system of New York. Because of how the licensing is done, they've said, okay, instead of having the licensing being something that grows, so the big mistake, and I say this because I used to work as a taxi driver and I'm a nerd and I looked into it. The big problem that happened with the taxi medallion system was they had it set up where you had to go through this whole bureaucratic thing just to add more medallions. When what it should have been something that fixed to the population, for every 100,000 people in New York, we're going to have this amount of medallions so that the medallions could grow with the population and wouldn't have these huge prices and huge things to go with it. And so they did the same thing with the marijuana licenses where it's we're going to have a fixed amount of licenses.
And on top of that, they tax it so much that it's just, you can't run a legal business and make enough money to pay your taxes. So it forces people to go underground, which then makes all the customers get used to buying shit underground and less come into the stores. So it's
not only that, it also incentivizes it's allowing the cartels to use the networking chains that these legal businesses set up just to go all through everything again.
They've got their own networks, you know, but the thing is now that the cartels are doing in California, because they've changed growing marijuana in any sense to a misdemeanor, the cartel has moved in and is growing outdoors again, in abandoned houses and shit, because when the people get caught, they just get a slap on the wrist and let go, and they take the weed and that's it.
So since we're talking about drugs, and since I know you're probably into like conspiracy stuff, I have a theory. You know all these UFO sightings? They're just the cartels. They came up with the technology. We don't know how to get around it. They're transporting this stuff.
Yeah.
There's no aliens. It's just the cartels.
That would be funny. Yeah, it's I don't know, the whole drug issue is an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a very...
I think that with all of it, honestly, all of it, the problem is basically just too much regulation. There's just far too much regulation.
Yeah, I think the founding fathers screwed up in that, one, they should have put a word cap on how many laws could exist.
Yeah.
Like, you're only allowed to have this amount of words.
Yeah.
And then at least, you know, like, we'd have to actually pick and choose what we want to actually enforce.
There should be an expiration date on every law.
Except for anything in the Constitution. That should last forever.
Because if there's an expiration date, then you know, hey, 5 years, do we still want weed to be illegal? No.
Actually, I think it was something that I thought would be even a better idea is that, like, because it takes like 2/3 for a law to get passed, the requirement should be that, like, in 5 years, 80% has to vote on it. So, like, if this law was as good as you say it is, then you should gain support for it. And if you can't, from the 66% of the vote...
No, because you don't know how things, like, how things are going to shake up over time, you know? Like,
well, that would be kind of the idea. It'd be like, hey, here's this law that we passed, 5 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
We had 66% of the people, or 60, not of the people, but of the political groups, or political class.
Yeah. Supported.
They voted for it. It got passed into law.
Yeah.
But in order for this law to remain, we now need 80%.
But you gotta remember, like, people will do bad things intentionally to help their party or their, so.
Well, that's kind of the idea, is that you have to prove by almost 15% increase, if you will, that this law that was passed 5 years ago is still
so easy to misrepresent things to people and shit, though. Like,
here's another thing I thought would have been a good idea, is that I wish politicians could submit bills anonymously. Like, not all of them, just one, because there are things that are like basic common sense. Like, the one that pisses me off here is in Nevada, is our school zone speeds. So they're set in 15 miles an hour. California, it's 20. Like, most cars don't idle at 15 miles an hour. But nobody is ever going to change that law, because the moment one political party does, and some kid gets ran over, the other political party is going to go around parading about how the other political party wants to kill your kids in the streets, and then nothing ever changes.
I think that here in Nevada, we gotta get rid of the fucking school boards. Like, I don't have kids, but, like, I almost want to run for school board because dude, like, there's a middle school out in Sun Valley that I did community service at a couple years ago, and they had the all gender restrooms where you have a floor to ceiling door, like this. You have a door just like this with a fucking deadbolt on it, and you're completely sealed in there. And this is a rape stall.
Not only just that, it's also like, if we have kids that can't read, and it's like, for me, it's like we have kids who think we fought the British during World War II.
Yeah.
Like, even if I agreed with all this gender identity nonsense, like, can we at least agree that, like, math and science, even science, I'm willing to put it back, like, to a little degree, but can we at least agree that maybe math, reading, and, like, history should be at least, like, the priority? No,
the priorities are teaching Jimmy that he can be Jamie.
Yeah, exactly.
And, and teaching Marquise that he can't be friends with John anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that's...
Well, John can, but he has to apologize for what his great-great-great-great-grandfather, who probably didn't even own a slave, did.
Yeah. I think that the Rockefellers and the other, owners of this country have been waiting for the crash for a while now. They've been just printing money like it's going out of style, and this is the final, like, when you're making orange juice you first squeeze, just all the juice comes right out. Well, we're at the point where they're grinding our grinds, our rounds in to get the last little bits of money before they just pull the rug out.
Well, I think like one thing as far as when you talk about society's collapse. So we had mentioned this earlier about black families. Well, look at what's being exported to now all families.
Yes. No, exactly, 100%. I was talking to a girl who just graduated from Reed. She was telling me that now everyone at Reed is like trying to be a blood, and I'm like,
sorry, I just hug. I'm just like, Reed, really? Like,
I
always considered Reed the rich kid school.
Yeah, I mean, it's middle class maybe, but
well, where I grew up, like middle class was like
rich. Yeah, but all the kids want to be bloods now and shit because that's just. They shut the world down. There was no other culture but YouTube. Yeah. So all you have in pop culture nowadays is drill, is rap music about killing people. And that's what they're selling to everyone. They're selling that and fucking heroin and fentanyl and just this gangster mentality and racial division because this system is going to collapse and they don't want to be held accountable.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting when you look at like when the Titanic was sinking. The lifeboats weren't given out equally. I mean, it was people got divided by class real quick.
Oh yeah.
And I think a lot of that tends to be the not birth pains, but the dying groans of a society where it becomes a clamor of. People like we no longer see ourselves as American, or to what degree in the past, because these class divisions have always existed. So like, I used to be pretty like, oh, the end is near, which is kind of ironic given our circumstance here. I become a little less doomsdayer just because this is something that we've gone through before. Now, I'm not saying it's going to end in where you're saying, but I think we can agree. I think we can agree that both. Where it's going and the path we're going along there is not healthy.
Yeah. And I like people always say like, oh, we've been here before, but I'm like, have we?
Well, I mean, the thing that I take a look at is this: like, people talk about American division. I'm like, there was a point where one dude got elected, and half this country decided to shoot the other half, and the other half shot. So like. Yeah. As far as division, I don't think it's.
But I'm not just talking about the division thing. First off, I mean.
And I think like in a weird way, the fact that we are kind of such a mixed society, which I know tends to be like a triggering amongst conservatives to say, is actually kind of a benefit. Yeah. Like if we were like, and I'm not talking about the coastal elites, which is a problem, but like because we are so like when you look at like especially the history of the Civil War, there was such a regional divide that it made it very easy for one side to group up. Yeah, be like we're going after this side.
That's the thing, man. That's what's happened now. I have so many. No, listen.
The highest number of Republicans is where?
I don't know.
California.
Interesting. Okay.
Like we're way more purple than we give ourselves credit for.
This is my point though. Now Nevada isn't going to be. Nevada's never a hotspot for political activity. Just never.
We did get that like swing part, and then like look at the last election. We held it up for like almost like a month.
Yeah, that's true. But like I'm saying, we don't have.
And we saw the most glorious memes because of it.
We don't have the riots in the streets and shit like that other places do.
I'm not sure. Maybe you saw, but like I know the riots that we had here. We
had protests. Nothing ever got smashed. Nothing got.
Well, the city hall building got pretty beat up. Yeah, like they got windows smashed, and they had a car that got caught on fire and welded to the asphalt. That took a while for them. Now I think Vegas probably. I would assume just because Vegas is just larger.
I was out a lot during that time period, and I never saw anything, honestly. So it wasn't possible.
I was working during that time, and we had to go like recall all the buses, get them off the routes. And it was pretty intense, and like we saw some of the fires, and of course I had to make the joke that everybody thought was inappropriate, which was because I kept seeing BLM spray painted everywhere. I'm like, why is the Bureau of Land Management so angry? But so it's like
I think that that there's that all that shit. But what I was trying to say, I don't really remember what I was trying to say. But when has there been so many homeless people? Like
that, I think is a big. I think actually the real reason why we have so many homeless. I think there's actually it's a good reason, but also kind of a sad reason for why I think we have so many homeless.
What?
Narcan.
What?
Narcan. We're having remedies to help people with overdoses.
Oh, Narcan.
Narcan, sorry.
Okay. Hold up. I see what you're saying, and I do some, but no.
And I also think there's also factors of like, my name is Rusty Shackelford. I've been thinking about just going to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Claiming that I'm homeless because they give homeless $600 a month.
I know.
And it's like San Francisco's 4 or 5 hour drive. Like, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
That's a car payment.
Yeah.
But I do think there's when it comes to homelessness, I kind of feel like most issues.
Here's what I think it is, and it's a multiple faceted reason.
Yeah.
Primarily, it's drugs, but
thank you.
Primarily it's drugs, but.
Well, I actually would have to kind of slightly disagree with that because I've met way more functioning addicts.
Oh yeah.
And it's like and I've met people who are homeless that just were not addicted to anything.
Yeah. No, but the thing is, that's not it. That's not the whole thing. Okay, you can't just say, oh, it's drugs. That's that.
Yeah.
If you live in California, man, and
nice weather.
Like, do you want to work 40 to 60 hours a week to barely pay your bills, live in a small studio apartment, isolated as fuck? You work, your body hurts, you get off, you don't have enough money to go out really and like pick up girls, maybe every now and again, you don't have a great existence in this. You're busting your ass for what? And I think a lot of people see that.
Getting tired of it, yeah.
And they're just like, okay, so I could do this, or they'll give me 3 hot meals a day.
I can get by.
They'll give me a tent. I have a phone. Like, how nice is it really sleeping indoors in California? How much do I really need this?
I mean, it's pretty like I remember growing up, like with my mom in San Jose, like it wasn't uncommon for like my sister just to sleep on the balcony of the apartment.
Yeah.
Because it's
nice.
Yeah.
So, how much do I really do? Is it worth it to pay $1,000 a month for a 10 by 10 room?
Yeah.
Like, is it worth it? No, fuck no. And there's a part of me that's like, man,
have you ever looked at the whole van life thing?
Yeah.
What sucks is the more you look into it, the more you're like, this actually makes sense.
Yes.
Like,
I've looked into it like a lot.
Yeah, same. If it wasn't for how cheap this place is, it kind of offsets that.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where it's like, like I was working as a bus driver, I got to experience the homelessness at a level that most don't. Mm-hmm. And, it was there are things that got confirmed. You talk about like not being able to get a girlfriend or, not being able to go girlfriend yet. I saw constant drama
between the homeless.
Yeah, where like,
no, that's what I mean. No, as a homeless person, you'll have time for relationships.
Well, not only just that,
it's
also
a working person. You don't.
I just remember one time I was at the bus station waiting to hop on the bus and drive my next route, and I'm seeing all these homeless people like talking, interacting. I'm like, this feels like middle school.
Yeah.
Like if people who like
they know each other.
Yeah.
They have more of a community than we do.
In some ways, yeah. And like the thing that I thought was kind of interesting too is that like, I think we've all had those days where we just like lied in bed and just watch Netflix all day.
That's them every day, man.
That's them every day. And it's like, I kind of get it. Like, I don't have to be beholden to anybody.
Yeah.
I'm not going to starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Nevada here, we have the winter, which does
get pretty rough.
It does get pretty rough. It does kill homeless people.
Yeah.
Especially down by the river.
Yeah.
But like if you're living in a place like Venice Beach.
Yeah.
Like I drove back from visiting my little brother in San Jose, and because I ended up taking a different route and drove by Oakland and San Francisco. I have never in my life, and have driven that route or road plenty of times.
Yeah.
I have never seen so many people walking on the highway.
Yeah.
Like I'm not talking or freeway.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about like. And they were all walking to their different encampments that they have set up.
Yeah.
And they're walking on the freeway, on the shoulders, and in the actual freeway itself. Ugh. And I'm like, I've never seen this. Like,
yeah, no, that's what I mean. Yeah. That's what I mean. You've never seen that, man. Yeah. This isn't like it's ever been before.
Yeah.
Like, and it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not just California. It's not just Philadelphia. It's fucking everywhere.
Well, it's like even I have friends that like live out in like Fernley and Fallon, and they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I grew up in Rio.
And I think that's just because these people are transient.
You would never see homeless encampments in Colin Ranch.
No.
Like
and you
never.
wouldn't see tents, period, on the streets.
I'm seeing tents set up in parking lots.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, when it comes to the homeless issue, I kind of think, like, many social issues, you need carrots and you need sticks. Mm. Here's the carrot. We're going to give you a reward for doing the right thing, but we're also going to need to bring the stick. But nobody wants to bring the stick. See, nobody wants to enforce vagrancy laws because those are mean.
Yeah.
But it's like, nope.
See, my thing is you need to incentivize, you need to make life for working, contributing people a little better and a little more like, why do you want to be a member of society if their society's going to fucking walk all over you, which is what it feels like as a minimum wage or anywhere near it worker.
Well, you know the CARES campus that was just built?
The what?
The new homeless shelter?
I heard about it.
You know how much that cost?
No.
52
million?
Yeah. And it's like, it houses 500, it can house up to 500, 600,000 homeless people.
600,000?
Or it's not 100,000, sorry. I did the math wrong. 500 to 600 homeless people.
Okay, yeah.
But look at that. That's 50. That's enough to buy basically every homeless person a house. And there is like a fundamental. Here's me putting on a hippie hat. Yeah. If you hired the homeless to build their own homes, they wouldn't be homeless, right? Yeah. But like, and I even have problems.
They wouldn't be able to do the job.
True. But that's kind of the fundamental.
And that is like in San Francisco and Seattle, they're giving people. They're just buying up apartment buildings and giving them to the homeless. That's just going to be Skid Row indoors.
Not only is that, it's also going to make it harder for
working people.
Yeah, working people to be able to find places, especially when you put a cap. Like my sister works as a loan officer, and we were talking about like different costs of housing because I'm like, you're talking about 2x4s, paints, and plywood. Yeah. Why is it costing a lifetime's income? I'm not sure if you saw that video that Home Depot had of like their little shed that was a 2-story house.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like $16,000. I'm like, and this is what pisses me off because this is actually socialism in work. Yeah. And like happening here in Northern Nevada. Yeah. We have this huge housing crisis. Mm-hmm. We're not like San Francisco or California where, you know, every space is occupied. Yeah. Like there's no space. Like, I see hills. Yeah. I see dirt. Like none of this is getting developed because the powers to be that are here locally have a financial incentive to keep the housing market high because they're all homeowners and basically became instant millionaires. Yep. No offense to your because of your employer. Yep. But it is the reality. Yeah. But it's also like you know, like in a freer society, we should be able to set up these little Home Depot sheds on a plot of land, rent them out for $500
and this is
a month.
Something else.
And that would help. And that's also that is to me like this is maybe I'm being a bleeding heart liberal. You have people that are on the bottom ring of that ladder. Yeah. And if you squish that ladder just a little bit, you're going to produce a lot more homeless people. Yeah. And when you have a mayor and a city council that is going around bulldozing freaking motels that were the last resort for people who had no other option, then you shouldn't be surprised that they're all of a sudden hopping into RVs and living on the side of the road. Yeah. And I can't fault them for that.
No, not at all. And I gotta, what was I just thinking of? Okay, with the homeless issue, with the regulation thing, the drugs, all of it kind of comes together on this one topic to me, like. The reason that so many young people get into selling drugs is because it's illegal. It has the lowest amount of money that you need to invest and start. Yeah. And because of that, because of it being illegal and there being no regulations around it, you don't have to hop over any red tape.
There's no tax forms to fill out.
There's none of it.
Certificates.
So it's the easiest business to get involved in, period, because there's not all this bullshit extra steps you have to do. And those bullshit extra steps are mostly just graft. It's all fucking scam.
Not only, well, I mean...
You look at the FDA...
You know, a lot of it, I think, honestly, is... it's bygone technology. Because, like, okay... Go back 30 years, restaurants having health grades posted by the health department kind of made sense. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really anything out there. Mm-hmm. We have Yelp. We have Google. Like, a lot of what government used to do, to me, is not necessary anymore because we have technology that's way better.
Well, that's actually one of the few government agencies that I wouldn't want to completely get rid of.
I actually think, like, if you actually get down to the nitty gritty, even most, like, if hardcore libertarian Republican types, if you actually
I want some health inspectors out there still.
Yeah, if you look at like what most government agencies do, they're not actually that crazy.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the people that work within those areas, they're not as like nuts. Now, granted, all it takes is one bad one.
Well, here's the thing though. It's the regulatory agencies that are funded by the things they're supposed to be regulating.
Yeah.
Like the FDA taking tons of money in from big pharma. Like, that's a problem.
I think there's also a bigger, that's a big problem. I think the other bigger problem is it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the war on drugs, where it's a boondoggle for those agencies. Mm. So, like, the police get a huge part of their funding done based upon how much cash they can confiscate from drug dealers.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's the same thing with, like, a property inspector or whatever, city official person who's like, they have to justify their existence.
Yes.
And say, hey.
And there's so many people.
In reality, like, I feel like, okay, as a taxpayer, part of my thing is, like, I recognize this is a payment that I'm paying in order for our community and society to exist. It's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
What's strange to me, and I want that sacrifice to be used reasonably and responsibly, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also, at the end of the day, I recognize that it's a loss. And it's like, our effort to try to make it a positive causes all these problems. Like, I mean, I could go into, like, with the bus service here, like, very little money gets actually brought into the bus service from the fare. So the customers are never prioritized. What does bring the money in is how many trips we've ran. So we'll run 6 buses on one route that's really quick because that's the funding that the RTC gets. Mm-hmm. Instead of actually taking one of those buses and servicing this over here, that's actually more needed.
All right, well, hold up. We got to wrap this up.
Oh, yeah.
But
so we kind of want
to quote, probably misquote, but Elon Musk said something about taxes. And I'm probably butchering it, but why are you going to appropriate funds, someone who's very good at appropriating funds and has turned them into many more funds, and take them and give them to organizations that are demonstrably bad at organizing funds and constantly lose them? Mm-hmm. That's very much the issue.
I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. And
but there is this, like, I don't want the cops making money off of enforcing laws.
No.
But we have to sacrifice for it.
Yeah.
Like, I actually think fines should not exist. Because it incentivizes the state to make more laws, and this actually has happened. Every time there's anytime the economy goes down and there's a financial dip, watch the traffic lights. You'll notice that they turn red a lot faster.
Interesting.
Because that increases the amount of red ticket lights that come up, and that increases the fund. Because the cop is, those agencies are on the hook.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, we need to get the funds in.
Yeah.
And, cops don't technically have quotas, but they do have expectations.
Yeah.
And if you work an entire shift and you're a cop and you didn't write out any tickets, you're going to get talked to, and that talking is not going to be good.
Yeah.
So it's basically a financial shakedown of the community. Yeah. I would rather just pay a higher tax, which I know is blasphemy to say, and actually have laws and crime and punishments that make sense.
But I got to say, I don't think that getting rid of fines makes sense, because, like, what's the alternative? You going to send somebody to jail for running a red light?
Well, here's a couple. What if we just say you're not allowed to drive for the next month?
Okay, so then they're going to lose their job.
But think about it. That's so one, if we are going to have fines, we should base fines not off of the offense, but based upon the person's
no, we don't have time to do all this. But I'm just saying that doesn't, you want to take somebody's right to drive a car?
Well, they can still get around.
How?
Uber.
No, you're making a lot of assumptions.
You're demonstrating an irresponsibility with the vehicle. Or regulate all vehicles where they can put a regulator on it and be like,
take away all freedom?
No, not all freedom. It's temporary. It's a temporary measure. It's just the punishment.
These are crazy.
You can go.
These are
You know what I mean? Like,
outlandish.
I'm joking, right?
Yeah.
You can only go 20 miles an hour. Suck it.
Okay.
Like, that would be hilarious.
All right. Well, this was a good episode.
Yep.
A very long one. How are we gonna do this? All right, let's end it. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end
Do
it
another
now.
clap, just-
No, once we have the one clap, we're good.
Cool.
So if you just hit pause on yours.